Okay, here is as I'm adjusting my camera, here's the second part of there we go, the video lecture for my high school students here. This was the last slide you saw, just to reassure you that you are in the right place here. Now, I gave you a working definition of group at the very beginning of the last presentation that you watched. More than two people interacting, pursuing a common goal. Okay, talk about primary groups and secondary groups. I'm going to start with primary groups, and you'll want to write this definition down. A primary group, by definition, is a small group whose members share personal and lasting relationships. Again, a small social group whose members share personal and lasting relationships. The best example of a primary group I can think of is your family. Your mother, your father, step-parents, maybe your grandparents, children, siblings. This is an example of a primary group. Close friendships that you may have, also example of primary groups. Now, I'm going to give you some things, some characteristics of primary groups. You're not going to see them on the slideshow here, but you're going to want to write them down, and I'll repeat them as well. So write these down. Here are some characteristics of primary groups. First of all, people in primary groups spend a great deal of time together. Also, they engage in a wide range of activities. They feel they know one another pretty well. People show real concern for one another. People view others as unique and irreplaceable. So those are the characteristics of primary groups, and we'll kind of go back and talk about each of them now. So the first one I mentioned, people spend a great deal of time together. Your family members, your close friends, you probably spend a good amount of time together. You live with your parents, with your friends, you probably go to the mall, you hang out in class, maybe in the hallways of your high school, you may play sports together. The second thing, people engage in a wide range of activities who are in primary groups. Your family, again, for example, you may have meals with your family, you may go to church with your family, you take vacations with your family members, so you engage in a wide range of activities with them. The third, people feel they know one another pretty well in primary groups. You know your family members pretty well. You know your siblings, your parents, your best friends. You probably know them inside and out. You know their warts and you know everything good about them as well. Also, people show real concern. You may not be as concerned for an acquaintance or for someone you really don't know if they're hurting or if something happens emotionally. But if it's your best friend, or if it's your mom, or if it's your sister or your brother, you're going to show genuine concern. Also, people view others as unique and irreplaceable. Acquaintances can be replaced. Very, very close friends, your very best friend, maybe not. Your parents, certainly not. Your siblings, certainly not. So those are the characteristics of primary groups. Now, secondary groups, conversely, secondary groups are still groups, but by definition, and you're going to want to write this down, secondary groups are large and impersonal social groups whose members pursue a specific goal or activity. Again, a secondary group, a large and impersonal social group whose members pursue a specific goal or activity. So it's large, like a classroom is the best example I can think of. This class that you sit in, wherever you're at in one of the schools that I teach at, is an example of a secondary group. It's large, especially if it's George Washington High School. We've got 35 students, 40 in some of these classes. It can be impersonal, and you're pursuing a common goal. You're trying to get a grade, you're trying to pass the course, you're trying to acquire your college credit. Employees who work for the same company would be another example of a secondary group. Some characteristics of secondary groups, again, you're not going to see these or find these in your books, so you want to write these down, and I'll go over them twice. First characteristic of a secondary group, they involve weak emotional ties. In other words, you're not as closely connected emotionally to people in secondary groups as you are to your primary group members, like your family members or your friends, your very best friends. Also, little personal knowledge of one another. You don't really know people. You probably don't know some people in this class very well or at all. You may not even know the names of some of the people that you're in class with. Next, the third facet of secondary groups. They're typically short-term, beginning and ending without particular significance. Okay? It's college class. It starts at a specific time. It started in August. It's going to end December the 12th. So there's a beginning and an end. It's just kind of the way it goes. Probably you guys aren't going to show up together in January when this class doesn't exist anymore just to hang out in the auditorium or in the classroom that we're in. I'm guessing not. Finally, secondary groups include more people than primary groups. They're bigger in number, quite simply. So again, just to review that, the characteristics of secondary groups that we covered, they involve weak emotional ties. Second, little personal knowledge of one another. Third, they tend to be short-term, beginning and ending without particular significance. And fourth, they include more people than do primary groups. So just kind of make sure that you've got that. Now, next thing I want to talk about is group cohesiveness. When you think of cohesion, think of glue. Glue makes things stick together. What are some factors that impact whether a group sticks together or stays together? Group cohesiveness, by definition, you want to write this down. The factors or elements of a group that pressure you into wanting to stay into the group or to stay a part of the group. So again, group cohesiveness, the factors or the elements of a group that pressure you or convince you to want to stay a part or a member of that group. Factors that impact group cohesiveness, whether the group stays together or not. First are costs. Now, these are going to be explanations more than definitions, but you're going to want to write these down. We talk about costs. Costs can be financial. They can be emotional. The higher the cost to stay in a group, the less likely you are to maintain your membership in that group. For example, if you really want to be a part of a club or a group, but it costs $1,000 a year to be in that group, you may not be able to afford that. So guess what? You may not be a member very long. If there are emotional costs, if you want to be a part of a primary group, you have some really good friends, but a couple of these friends start really hurting your feelings, or there's a problem, there's a dating situation that causes conflict, the emotional cost may be too high, so you may drop out of that group. External threats, this is the next thing. External threats can actually increase cohesiveness. If you're a part of a group, whether it's a primary or a secondary group, and someone is threatening your group, it can actually bring you together. For example, terrorist attacks. A threat from an outside group on a secondary group can actually bring people together. Competition also impacts cohesiveness. Competition can increase cohesiveness. If you have a secondary group who maybe are not closely connected, a sporting team is a good example of this. They may not be super close, but if there's a threat from another team that they're going to come in and beat you and knock you out of the playoffs, then even if you don't exactly like everybody on your team, you're going to play together. You're going to stick together. Reinforcement. Rewards make groups more cohesive. If there are rewards offered in a group or to maintain membership in a group, then you are more likely to stay in that group and to maintain your membership. And group size. Generally speaking, smaller groups produce more cohesiveness. Larger groups, more diversity. So group size also will impact the cohesiveness of a group. Now, there are advantages of groups over individuals, and we'll take these one at a time. So advantages of groups over individual. First of all, requirements. Some jobs or some tasks require a lot of work, a lot of effort. Orchestras, doctors who are doing surgery, construction crews. Some jobs require multiple people doing the job, very simply stated. I'd rather have 20 people building my house than one person trying to do it all. One person can't play an orchestral piece. It takes many people playing different instruments. Cumulative resources. A group has more knowledge than one person. I may be a smart guy, which I'm not, but is it better to have just one brain, or is it better to have 20 brains trying to complete a task? Yeah, it's better to have more than one person. Also, error rejection. Recognition of bad ideas is more likely to occur in group settings. I may have a horrible idea, but I'm the only person in the room, so I'm not going to recognize my idea really stinks. But if there's 10 people in the room, 8 other people might say, well, you know what, Brandon, that's kind of a crappy idea, and here's why. And then I might be like, oh, yeah, you're right. So the ability to recognize bad ideas, error rejection. And last is specialization. This allows for a division of labor and a more efficient product. Again, I'll use it kind of like a construction example. I had my roof replaced on my house some years ago. I tried to do it by myself, and I couldn't do it. I wasn't specialized enough. I didn't know how to do it. So I hired a group of guys to come in, a group of men who worked for a company to come in with specialized knowledge. So one guy was good at taking the tile up, the other guy was good at cutting the metal, making it precise. One of the other guys was good at putting it down. There was another guy doing all the measurements. So they specialized and they worked together to produce a more efficient product. And then last, we have a discussion about how sometimes individuals have more advantages, or the advantages of individuals over groups. So sometimes individuals can be more beneficial. First of all, coordination loss. Sometimes it's just difficult to get people to work together. If people don't, they get lazy. We talked about social loafing, the idea that people exert less effort when they're working in a group. So you could have actually coordination loss in a less efficient product when people work together. Also, motivation losses. In groups, people may feel less accountable, and they may not be as motivated to perform. If you're working by yourself, you're going to be more motivated to get it done because it all falls back on you. So motivation losses occur in group settings sometimes. So that's another advantage of individuals over groups. Conformity. Conformity may interrupt performance of a group. So if you're an individual working alone, you may do the job and do it the right way. If you're in a group that has a negative influence, you may conform to that group pressure, and it may turn out to be disadvantageous or to a disadvantage. And then last, interpersonal problems. Sometimes people, they may work beautifully individually and they may work beautifully together, but if there are interpersonal problems, if they don't get along, if there's infighting, it's not going to matter. There's not going to be much efficient, productive work or task completion going on in that case. So that's it for that part. Make sure you have good notes on this. Go back through if you didn't take down good notes. You're going to want to have notes on each and every one of these concepts that we talked about in the video. So we'll call that the end of that part. Thanks.